Welcome to State of the State. I'm John Calavalli, hosting this program with our guest, Terrence Gray. Terry is the Deputy Director for Environmental Protection at the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Protection, known as DEM. He has been with DEM for over 33 years. Welcome to State of the State, Terry.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be on today.
It's a pleasure to have you here. We're going to be talking about an important initiative this evening, the Transportation and Climate Initiative. But before we dive into that, tell our viewers a little bit about your oversight responsibilities.
Well, John, my part of DEM focuses on clean air, clean water, waste management, cleanup of contaminated sites, emergency response, and a lot of permitting and enforcement aspects. Our job is to make sure that there's a clean environment for Rhode Islanders to enjoy.
And the department has made great strides in that area, no doubt about that.
Absolutely. We have huge progress. We're very proud of the work that we do. We have a really dedicated staff, and we've made the place a lot better for our residents.
And some of our viewers may remember we, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, under Frank Lombardo's tutelage, we did a great deal in this particular area with electric cars, hybrids, carbon tax, and things of that nature. And we haven't done it for a while. And I'm very pleased that we're doing it again, and particularly with you, Terry.
Thank you. As you know, climate change is a big challenge. We're the ocean state. It's a big issue in Rhode Island. We have to come up with some realistic strategies to be able to respond to the changes that are going on around us. And looking at transportation is a critical element of that.
Indeed. We're going to be talking about the Transportation and Climate Initiative. I suppose, Terry, we probably should ask the question, what is the Transportation and Climate Initiative? How did it get started? Who or what's involved? And you can fill in the sensible blanks because you know this inside and out. I've seen you before.
It's actually been going on for quite a while, John. When you look at transportation, it makes up 40% of the greenhouse gases that are emitted in Rhode Island, which is a lot. There's all kinds of other pollutants that are also emitted from transportation as well that we need to work on. But from the climate perspective, we've joined with 10 other states and the District of Columbia to start to design a program across the Mid-Atlantic and New England states to try and start to deal with this. It's really an interesting effort because it includes both states that are governed by Democrats as well as states that are governed by Republicans. It's bipartisan. So there's quite a lot of talk. We've really worked hard over the last year in particular to really start to design this program and see how it could benefit all our citizens.
Now, Terry, you correct me if I misspeak because I'm the student here and you're the teacher. But this initiative is in the process of doing what in particular at this point?
Well, right now, what we've done is we spent most of 2019 designing the process. And the process is what's called a cap and invest model. So we look at all the emissions from the transportation sector and we count them up and we say, all right, that's enough. That's the cap. And then as state policymakers, we're going to reduce that cap over time, which actually reduces the emissions. The way the program works is the oil companies that provide the fuels that drive our fossil fuel-based vehicles will have to buy these things called allowances. An allowance is essentially a permit to emit 1 ton of carbon. And it's tough to get your mind around exactly what 1 ton of carbon really is. But if you think about a gallon of gasoline, when you drive home and you burn a gallon of gasoline, you're actually emitting 20 pounds of carbon dioxide. So then when you take that number and you take Rhode Island, you take Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, all the way down to Virginia, that's a lot of carbon dioxide that's been emitting. So what we want to do is reduce that number over time by lowering that cap. The oil companies will bid for these allowances in a publicly traded auction. It's not something that the government dictates, and they will buy the number of allowances that they need to offset the emissions from burning the fuels that they sell. And then the proceeds from that auction are then allocated across the participating states. And the idea is that we'll take that and we will invest it in ways that'll benefit Rhode Islanders with much cleaner transportation.
Well, I have a couple of questions based upon what you've just said. We're speaking particularly about carbon-based fuels, so that would be gasoline, diesel. Does that include natural gas and propane?
No, it's primarily gasoline and on-road diesel.
Okay. And I'm having a little trouble wrapping my head around this auction situation. If you could try to drill that into
you know, John, it's a tough concept to grasp, and it's a compliance mechanism. It's almost like a permit to emit, like an air pollution control permit for a factory, except it's being applied to the oil companies for the products that they sell. We developed this model for power plants a few years ago with something called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative.
I remember that.
And what's happened in that is the companies that generate electricity bid into a very similar auction for the carbon that's emitted when their plants are running. And then the money from that auction is then allocated across the states, and it goes into things like energy efficiency and investment in renewable energy, things that are going to reduce our demand for fossil fuel-based electricity in the future.
I see. It sounds a little bit like this, and again, I may have a misconception about this, but if I'm manufacturing of, let's say, gasoline, and I have a certain quota that I produce on an annual basis. So I have a fairly clear-cut idea about how much carbon emission is going to be involved in that production. So I would be required by law to purchase that amount in order to meet my own business quota so I can earn the money that I expect to earn as a producer of gasoline.
Pretty much, right, that's correct. The really interesting thing about the cap and invest model is it gives those oil companies an opportunity to really innovate and look at things like biodiesel and other fuels that are not based on petroleum products. They don't generate as much carbon when they're used. It gives them an opportunity to really reduce their own environmental footprint, and that will save them money, and it makes their fuels cleaner, which is one of the things we want to motivate through the cap and invest model.
So you're hoping that companies will engage perhaps in this kind of thinking. Gee, we've been producing gasoline for quite a while, but this is becoming a little more costly now under these new rules of operation. Perhaps we should do something else.
Right. Right. And I think one of the things that you should consider too is that gasoline prices can be volatile. If there's unrest in certain parts of the world, gasoline prices could skyrocket overnight. If you look across Rhode Island right now, sometimes the prices of gasoline vary as much as 70 cents just in one day.
Sure.
And what we want to do is not only come up with cleaner transportation options, but make ourselves self-sufficient and to stabilize prices so that customers aren't really hit with those price swings depending on what's going on in the world.
As an oil producer, let's say I have a fairly good business going. I'm a little reluctant immediately to change my shift of what my product is going to be. So I'm going to continue at least doing this for a while until I figure out what other avenue I have. But in the meantime, this is going to cost me as a producer a bit more money. Will I not be passing that on?
Maybe. So there's a couple of key issues that you brought up in your question. One is the concept of a tax. So a lot of people are framing TCI as an additional gas tax. It absolutely is not that. In a tax, all that's going on is the customers are being charged extra money on top of the product that they're buying, and that money just provides a revenue stream to government.
Got it.
This is not a tax. What this is the oil companies have to comply with our rules on reduction in emissions, and they have to buy these allowances in order to do that. The money from the purchase of the allowances is generated through this public auction. So the state doesn't really know what the price is going to be. That's determined by the market. But the proceeds do come back to the states that are participating, and that's where the benefits come from. We can invest that money on a lot of clean transportation options. We can look at new bike paths. We can look at advancing the adoption of electric vehicles. We can look at more electric buses for RIPTA and expanding RIPTA service across the state. We can look at reducing congestion. So for people that are commuting into the city a lot, they're stuck in traffic, this could be used for congestion mitigation,
Sure.
which is a big deal. And we can also look at regional rail and try and do clean regional rail so that people that are commuting up to Boston can have more options and more opportunities. There's a lot of possibilities here.
Well, as I'm listening to you enumerate the possible uses of the proceeds from the auction, I'm not hearing anything about bridge repair, potholes, and things of that nature. Is that a sanction? Is that a prohibition?
Well, the beauty of the program, the way we're designing it is it's up to the states on how they want to invest the money. The goal is to invest in clean transportation. And I know DOT is working on their own business plans to have sustainable bridge maintenance, sustainable roadway maintenance. It's a little separate from this. But there's nothing that would prohibit us from investing in that if the need be. So we have a lot of leeway. What we want to do is come up with the investment portfolio that benefits the most of Rhode Island citizens and Rhode Island as a whole.
And it sounds to me as though, Terry, again, if I misunderstand, say so, but it sounds to me like your preference would be to invest in cleaner alternatives, electric cars, the electric buses that RIPTA has begun to purchase and use, rather than filling a pothole or replacing a bridge.
Well, that's the purpose of the program, John, is to try and get cleaner transportation. And cleaner transportation is not all about climate change. There's a lot of other chemicals that are emitted when you burn fossil fuels. They come out the tailpipe.
Sure.
And we've done some studies that look along the side of some of our more congested highways, and we've done some air monitoring. And we found that people that live in those areas closer to the highways are getting exposed to much higher levels of pollution than people that don't live near the highways.
Of course.
So the idea is if we can make the whole transportation system cleaner, that's going to lead to a lot healthier environment for Rhode Islanders to live and a lot healthier Rhode Islanders.
Now, you're saying that this will or will not influence the price of gasoline?
It may.
It may.
It may. So there's a lot of things that go into the price of gasoline, and there's a lot of factors that go into the business of producing and distributing and selling gasoline. So we've done some modeling to try and look at the cost benefit of this program. When we do the modeling, we make a very conservative assumption that all the costs are going to be passed on to the customer. So then we want to make sure that that is minimized as much as we can and in sync with the benefits that those customers are going to get. They want to see some benefit for their money, obviously. But like I said, the price of gasoline varies a lot right now. A lot of that's the business decisions by the companies that do that. Where I live, there's a company down the street that just completely replaced their gas station. Brand new facility, brand new tanks, new convenience store, the whole system. Well, that cost does not automatically get reflected in the price of gas that they sell there. That's part of the business decisions that
Sure.
vendor has done. Yeah. So some of it's going to be incorporated and some of it may be seen by the customer.
I'm trying to anticipate some of the questions that some people I know might have, and certainly I can use myself as an example. A number of years ago, I decided to buy a hybrid automobile because I really wanted to make a commitment to using less gasoline and to do my part in creating a cleaner environment. And now I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute, I invested a little extra money to buy a hybrid car, and I'm saving on gasoline, indeed, significantly, by the way. I think I'm spending half the amount that I did before, and I had a car that got very good gas mileage. But I'm a little concerned now that I might be paying a little bit more for the gas that I do buy, because it's a hybrid. And I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute now, this is going to reduce my benefit of owning that at this point. So now what do I do?
Well, first of all, thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
It's great that you're doing your part. I think when you bought your hybrid, it was probably a little bit more expensive than a standard car, right?
Yes.
And I don't know if it's a plug-in hybrid or just a regular one.
It's a regular hybrid, yeah.
What we're trying to do is even the playing field. So one of the benefits that we see out of this program is that we may be able to provide incentives for people that buy hybrids or buy plug-in hybrids, which are even more efficient, and make them cost competitive with the rest of the cars. What car you drive will always be your choice.
Of course.
But this really kind of evens the playing field and makes those choices more affordable to people. Yep. The other thing a lot of people get nervous about is when you have an electric vehicle, how far can you go on a charge?
Yes, big concern. That's why I bought a hybrid rather than a totally electric.
So one of the things we want to do is we really want to provide more opportunities for people to conveniently charge their vehicles as they go about their day-to-day life. Mm-hmm. So DOT is investing heavily in putting charging stations at some of their park and rides and rest stops. There's a lot of companies across Rhode Island that are investing in charging stations. Pretty soon, that's going to be just an accepted part of infrastructure in the transportation world.
And that might be part of how you use the proceeds to expand the number or increase the number of charging stations. I'd like to ask you some other things about this, because this is a group of 12 states. Do I have that right? 12 states?
11 states plus the District of Columbia.
11 states. So this is not a federal program.
No.
So the funds that are generated will not be coming from the federal government. They will be coming solely from the auctions and the money derived from the auctions. So I imagine Rhode Island is participating. It's the smallest of all states. There are some larger states participating. I can't imagine that each state would get an equal amount of the proceeds.
No. The states are working to try and come up with a formula to allocate the proceeds. And we're small, but we have a lot of people.
Yes.
It's a very densely populated state. We have a lot of vehicles. So we'll get our share. We're very We're very active in that. The Director Coit in particular is sitting directly on that panel that's working on that allocation model. And she is very aggressively representing Rhode Island in that dialogue. So I'm pretty confident we're going to get at least our fair share and maybe a little bit more out of that. Yeah. But it's complicated. Like you said, there's no federal framework for this. So it's really interesting to see all these state governments with multiple departments sit down and try and develop something, collectively. It's a really neat process.
Now, not all states have gotten on the bandwagon. For example, in New England, I think that there's Connecticut and New Hampshire and a couple of others in New England that have expressed a no thank you, more or less. So what do you make of that, Terry?
Well, New Hampshire said no thank you for now. I think the governor of New Hampshire took a look at the landscape up there, public opinion, the other priorities that they have right now, and they weren't moving forward with this at this time. Some of the other states are really in a wait and see type attitude. We're very excited about the opportunities here. Governor Raimondo is very excited about the opportunities. Governor Baker in Massachusetts is really excited about this. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, it's a wait and see to see how everything comes together.
And part of the wait and see, if I understand this correctly, is that this will require each state that's going to be involved to pass legislation.
Right.
And if my understanding is correct, the Speaker of the Rhode Island House has said no, along with maybe 20 or more Democrat and Republican legislators. So you don't have open arms in the Rhode Island General Assembly at this point. So where are you with that?
Well, John, it's really early in the process. So we really haven't gotten out there and communicated the benefits of this. Mm-hmm. The only thing that's happened is people have talked about the potential costs. So of course, when you talk about a new cost on Rhode Islanders, people are like, well, I don't think so. But when you balance that with the real benefits that you get from this program, then that may be a more productive discussion at that point. So our job is to get out there to figure out this portfolio that I talked about that will benefit all our citizens, and then communicate that to the elected officials so that they understand that there's a positive that's going to come out of this program.
You have work ahead of you on that. But
that's the legislative process.
Of course.
We do that all the time with different environmental issues.
Yeah. And you've been a public servant for long enough to know that it's akin to making sausage. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it can get messy and it takes a long time, and you get a little of what you want, or you get more than you expected to get, but you keep working at it.
But John, the other thing to keep in mind is when the sausage is done, we've got some excellent environmental laws on the books that are modeled for New England and elsewhere in the country. Our legislature has really kind of came out and exerted some leadership in a lot of different environmental issues.
Yes.
So sometimes it takes a while. There's an awful lot of dialogue that needs to go on, communication, education, negotiation. But at the end of the day, we do get some very strong and very effective environmental laws.
Well, I think regardless of our political persuasion, if you will, we all live here and want to live and breathe clean air and drink good water. There was a time when I was a youngster that Providence Water was noted for having the best water in the world. And so we all have those concerns. But the concern always is this going to cost me more money? And as you said, it could increase the price of gasoline. And it seems to me that this would be a little angst for many, even individuals that are very much committed to a better ecosystem. What happens, and I'm thinking in terms of the worst case scenario, what happens if you're unable to convince the Rhode Island legislature that they ought to pass legislation supporting this initiative?
Well, I think that if that were to happen, and we hope it doesn't, we hope we have a very productive discussion with them. If that happens, then I think we have to regroup and we have to look at other strategies to get clean transportation. It's important both in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also the health of our residents.
Is this something that could be accomplished by executive order?
We haven't really looked into that. I think our goal is to work with the legislature to come up with a good approach that is solid, backed by state law, that reflects a consensus of all the elected officials.
Indeed. Terry, I want to share with our viewers something that they can read for themselves on the DEM website, and it may spark you to elaborate a little bit. The Transportation and Climate Initiative, this is what is on the Department of Environmental Management website, a multi-state effort amongst the transportation, energy, and environmental state agencies in 11 mid-Atlantic and northeast states and the District of Columbia to work collaboratively to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for the transportation sector. What would you anticipate would be the collaborative work once a state was able to pass this legislation? Where does the collaboration come in?
Well, I think we want to collaborate on that investment strategy to make sure that we get the optimum benefit out of the money that's generated through the auctions. So some of the examples that are out there of regional collaboration are things like regional rail. We work with the MBTA to provide regular rail service. We want to provide more rail service, and we want that to be cleaner rail service as well. Another example is we're working with a number of states along the East Coast to develop an EV corridor that parallels 95, so that there are regular charging stations. So if somebody wanted to drive from Providence to DC, they could do it, and they know where their charging stations are along the way.
That's an excellent example of collaboration. Terrence Murray, we have less than a minute remaining, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to kind of summarize or leave with our viewers some ideas that you want them to have and remain with.
I think, John, the big takeaways are this is a bipartisan effort. So there's Republicans, there's Democrats at the table working on this approach. It's really all about clean transportation and providing new opportunities, new benefits to our residents to drive cleaner and to ride cleaner. And that could be a variety of really interesting and beneficial things. Bike paths, new buses, rail, EVs, all of those things are on the table. We want to come up with a mix that's going to benefit the most number of Rhode Islanders and brings the biggest value back to our state.
Thank you for watching State of the State, and please join us again next time for the next edition.